Good evening, my name is Qwizical and I'm here to bring you another one of Qwizical's guides to. And today we're looking at pre-endgames. Now, a really top young player once told me that pre-endgames should start around when there are 15 tiles left. And this is because this is when you start planning for your endgame. This is when a lot of your major moves can happen if you're behind or if you're leading. It's where you can lose the game if you don't plan it properly. So we're going to look at a situation that I had found recently and a player on ISC had asked me about, and we looked at the game together and it was pretty neat. So I've removed the players' names. I'm not going to say who's on move, but we're going to go through the rack as if both players were playing it, and we're going to see what players would do in that situation. So here's the board. We're sitting with it's a decent rack for this point of the board. We're going to start going through the game with the player that's on 252 points. We are behind at this point, but our rack is relatively bonus friendly, apart from the W and the P. We do have two E's, the last two E's, which are really, really good. And we also have a case D for the diota hook over at B11. And that's really key because our opponent cannot use that hook themselves. There's no B's left, which is the other hook for iota. And if they do have to block it, they're going to be sacrificing points to do so. So ideally at this point in the game, we need to keep our D, and we need the bonus to win. So a play like Whereas, W-A-R-E-Z, that opens up the left-hand side of the board, and it enables a second opening to be made, and even if your opponent does block one of them, you should have another. Of course, you're relying on pickups. That's the only thing you can do at this point in the game, but you'd rather have a chance of winning than no chance of winning. So here, Whereas, it's got to be a very strong candidate play in order to give you that shot at winning. So when you're behind in a pre-end game, you need to think about how you are going to win. Because if you don't think about how you're going to win, you can't really plan to win. If you just think, right, the game is lost, I'm not going to do anything, I'm just going to play my normal game, you're not giving yourself the best chance of winning. You're essentially handing the game to your opponent, and you need to think about the challenge and the puzzle involved in how to win. Sometimes you win games because your final move is a bonus, and that just happens. Sometimes you win because your final move was a 9-timer. That also happens. But you need to remember that unless you give it a shot, you're not going to win. But if we take this example from the player on 315 points, what do we do with this rack? We're really close to a bonus, and that we've got the case D. So if we're the player in the lead here, the player behind is not going to close off the diota hook at B11, and they're not going to, or they shouldn't do this, because they need to keep the board open. If they don't keep the board open, there's no chance for them to bonus and win. And essentially, if the board remains closed, the only way they can really win is if you screw up. So ideally, you're not going to screw up and play phonies and let them get back in the game. But you're going to play valid plays that slowly gets rid of tiles from the bag, and you're going to win. And you're just going to close out the game, and you're not going to really worry about, getting stuck with letters or whatever. Of course, you need to get worried about getting stuck with letters, because sometimes that is the way you can lose, and you need to plan for those letters in case you get stuck. But more about that when we talk about endgames. So in this situation, what is the player in the lead going to do with this rack? Well, they're going to keep the board closed. If they open the board, their opponent has a chance to get back in the game if they've got a good rack and they're able to bonus. And you need the control, and the control of the board comes best when you keep it closed. You can't control a board when you've blown it open. So any defensive play in this bottom right quadrant here, or just single tile plays maybe, or if you can play a couple of tiles where you're still keeping the board closed, it's completely fine. But of course here this player is so close to a bonus. Now this particular position will be discussed more in a future video about fishing, which is really interesting because I had a conversation online with a load of people about this position, and the probabilities are really interesting. So yeah, it's a pretty decent position to look at. So if we go and look at our summary of what I've just discussed really quickly, what I haven't talked about in too much detail is tile tracking, but tile tracking is really important. Like I said, we've got the case E's, final E's, and the case D, and we wouldn't know that unless we were tile tracking. And one of the things that tile tracking allows you to do is plan ahead. And if you don't tile track, you can't plan ahead with very good accuracy. And it's so rare to find players at the top echelons of Scrabble who do not tile track. And they tile track because it allows them to predict endgames like this, particularly close endgames. And it allows them to calculate probabilities and do everything that they can do with certainty or great accuracy. And it allows you to ensure that you're not missing anything. So the second point is, what are the situation with scores? I went through the scores on both sides of the players here, but the situation with scores is also important because if you're behind by about 50 points, you may need a bonus, so you may need to consider what you're going to do to get that bonus. But also, if you're leading, what are you going to do to maintain that lead? And that brings me on to my third point. What do you need to do to win? Do you need that bonus? Is the board too closed to play the bonus? Do you need to open the board out some more to maybe get that bonus down? Are you leading? Is the board too open? Do you need to close it down? Do you have any case letters that maybe allows you to leave certain areas of the board alone? Do you need to worry about your opponent getting specific letters or having specific plays somewhere on the board that worry you? It's all about board vision as well. And just remember that all these different videos, all the concepts within them are linked. So don't just think, right, pre-endgames, what do I do? It's linked to board vision, it's linked to rack balancing, it's going to be linked to things like fishing and thinking about your endgames as well. It's all really important. And the final point, number 4, is worry tiles. Is there a potential for you, usually in the lead, to get stuck with a certain letter which enables your opponent to come back? For example, if their Q is still unseen, but there are no I's and no U's left, and few T's, how is that Q going to be played on the board? You don't want to get stuck with it, have that 20-point swing, and lose the game because you didn't think to plan for that Q. And there are some really interesting things about Q stuckness, and that will obviously be talked more about in Endgame, but those sorts of things are what you need to think about during your pre-endgame, so that when it does eventually come to endgame, you're well prepared to close out the victory. So thank you for listening to my short segment on pre-endgames. I hope you will keep watching for my videos on and my guides on this channel, and hopefully you enjoy it, you've learnt something, and I will see you next time.